What would you do? What would you do if you were driving alone on a country road and saw a hair-covered human-shaped monster cross in front of your car? Would you tell your wife what you saw? Would she believe you? Would you tell your friends? Would they believe you? Would you tell the police or the people at a university? Would you expect to be believed there? If you think about those questions, I expect you will note that there are few, if any of them, to which you can answer yes with any degree of confidence. The people who know you well would ask what you had been drinking, or at best they might take you seriously enough to start worrying about you. The authorities would be polite to you, but they wouldn't do anything, and they would be glad to see you go. Right there is the key to the whole problem of the Sasquatch. No matter how often they are seen, and I expect that far more people see them than would see, for instance, wolverines, the information doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't add a weight of accumulated testimony because it doesn't accumulate at all. The strange thing is that there is nothing about the Sasquatch that is particularly remarkable. An elephant is a far more unlikely animal, and a duck-billed platypus even more so. Descriptions, photographs, footprints all indicate that the Sasquatch is just a big primate of the same family as man and the anthropoid apes, which has made the same adaptation that man did for walking on only two legs. It shares its habitat with moose, elk, and bears that are of similar size and far more numerous. Gorillas, which are just about as big, get along on a strictly vegetable diet. The Sasquatch doesn't enjoy the same choice of fodder, but it also eats meat. The origin of such a creature is no problem either. Teeth and jaw bones of something quite similar have been found in China. It lived 500,000 years ago and has been described as being bigger than a gorilla but walking erect. A pretty good thumbnail description of what people have been seeing in North America all along. How it got here is also no problem. Man and a lot of types of animals are believed to have reached North America via a land bridge from Siberia. Gigantopithecus, as he has been labeled, could easily have tagged along. All right, so that is a excerpt from John Green's Bigfoot, On the Track of the Sasquatch from 1973. And this includes two books that he wrote about Bigfoot. Let's see, I should have written this down, I'm sure. More evidence of me being a complete amateur. So the two books in this one volume is On the Track of the Sasquatch. I think that's from 1969. And The Year of the Sasquatch, I believe that's from 1971. It was later collected in this two-volume copy here. So John Green wasn't just some nut walking around thinking that he had seen Sasquatch when really he'd seen a bear or something like that. John Green was a journalist. He had gone to college and got a journalism degree, and he owned a newspaper in the town in which he lived, and he'd also been mayor in the town he lived in British Columbia. I believe British Columbia is the westernmost part of Canada. I think that's where the X-Files was filmed, the first few seasons, and I'm sure my Canadian friends will correct me if I am wrong about that. So John Green had grown up hearing stories of Sasquatch, and he started to hear that people had seen footprints, and he actually went somewhere and saw footprints himself, and he became fascinated by Sasquatch, by Bigfoot, and decided that he would devote a considerable chunk of his life to trying to prove that there really was a Bigfoot, or on the other hand, to disprove if there was a Bigfoot. So he was open to the idea of there being a Bigfoot. He had seen the footprints himself, but he was also open to the idea that perhaps it could be a hoax. And he felt that people needed to know whether this creature in the woods was real or if it was fake. And so he went about trying to prove that one way or the other, and he became pretty big in the Bigfoot field of the time. And he talked to lots and lots of people, and people started to bring their sightings, their evidence to him. and he would go from British Columbia all the way down to Northern California at times. And this is a really interesting book because it talks about the people who have claimed to see Bigfoot. And a lot of them were loggers out in the middle of nowhere who saw this bipedal creature, this huge, hairy creature that a lot of them described as being humanoid. And they described it in very similar ways, something from 8 to 14 feet tall, with a almost non-existent neck covered in hair, with a human-like face, and capable of running very fast, capable of lifting things that people cannot lift, like giant tires or even trucks. They would find footprints in the snow going for miles and miles, footprints in the sand. And of course there was the the Patterson-Gimlin film that came along in the late 60s of the very famous Bigfoot film. And John Green would meet Patterson later on, and I think he went to the same area where that film was taken. The jury is still out on that one, whether that is real or fake. It's very intriguing footage. If you see the original, it's very blurry and it moves around a lot, and it has been stabilized and enhanced over the years. There are arguments for its being a fraud, and there are arguments for it being genuine. And so far, like I said, the jury's still out on that one. John Green leaned towards that being real footage of a Sasquatch. And this was a very enjoyable read. I don't know what to think about Bigfoot. I have personally watched quite a bit about Bigfoot over the years, not as much since I've been into my 30s or anything like that, or my late 20s, but when I was much younger, I used to watch all kinds of shows about ghosts, about Bigfoot, and sea monsters, and all sorts of crazy things. And I think that Green makes a really interesting case for this, because this was at a time before the internet. This was at a time when people who had absolutely no way of knowing each other were seeing something incredibly similar in the woods. And yeah, I don't know. I'm skeptical myself. It's not impossible, but it is unlikely. Let's put it that way. But you know, the Fox Mulder kid in me hopes that there is a Bigfoot, right? But the rational adult in me says, I don't think so. But who knows, right? And even John Green admits that the only way we are ever going to know if there is really a Bigfoot is if someone either captures or kills one. And there is a disparagingly high amount of accounts in this where people went out and shot at Bigfoot, or went out into the woods armed to the teeth to kill one. And a lot of it is just, I've never seen that before, better kill it. And that's just messed up, you know. That's very childish. That is a very anyway, we'll just move on from that. There are really interesting accounts in this book, and I thought that I would read one to you. I found it very interesting because it doesn't seem really like the sort of account that you would make up. It seems to be just real enough to be believable, right? Whereas an account that is fake, it might be, well, I saw him and he screamed at me and threw something at me and I thought I was going to die, which is whatever, that's possible. But it seems like this story in particular stood out to me as being filled with details that just don't seem like somebody would choose to make them up, really, or would choose to tell this whole long story. So this was recorded, I believe. So here we go. It's a little bit long, but I think it's interesting. Where is it here? I was on the wrong page. So I actually had to look up a word in this, and it's cat skinner. And it's not what you think it is at all. It means someone who was running like a bulldozer, like a bulldozer with caterpillar tracks. I was supposed to be watching a cat skinner as he was fire trailing, but it was awful cold, and I walked a mile or so down the trail. Keep in mind, this is out in the middle of nowhere in British Columbia, I believe. Or, no, I'm sorry, this is in Oregon, so I'm completely wrong. I'll start over. I was supposed to be watching a cat skinner as he was fire trailing, but it was awful cold, and I walked a mile or so down the trail because he had no need of anyone at that time, and I thought I'd warm up and see the country. Up where he was, it was a cold east wind blowing. A little farther down, it was a west wind coming in. It was late fall, the last weekend in deer season, I think, in 1967. It was just a mountain trail. They have several of them up there, footpaths and for horses. The elevation was about between 4,000 and 5,000 feet. I came out lower down into the fog before I saw anything, and the fog was freezing on the trees because it was so cold, but if the wind would blow, the fog would break and fall off. That made it kind of noisy. It sounded like walking. I came around a bend. Well, first I noticed some rocks that were turned over. All the other rocks were wet because of the fog, but these rocks were dry. Then I looked up, about 40 or 50 feet, up on a ridge of rock, and I saw these animals there. Looked like human or just about. Large male. The female wasn't so large, and a small baby. Well, not really small. It was moving with them. It was standing up, mostly. The two older ones were squatting down and sort of bending as they picked up rocks and smelled them. They were kind of careful. They moved on for a few minutes, and then finally the male found possibly what he was looking for and dug real fast down into the rocks, which were large boulders, not the round type of rock, but the flat, sharp kind. I could not explain why those rocks were there. There hadn't been a slide or anything. They were on top of the ridge, so they couldn't have come down from anywhere. They are loose, quite a few holes underneath them, and they are as if they had been broken up. Definitely not the round river-type rock, but they, the animals, would pick them up, and after they smelled them, they would lay them down on top of each other. They didn't just lay them back where they had picked them up, they stacked them up in piles. And when the male found what he was looking for, he really made the rocks fly. The big rocks weighed 50, 60, or even possibly 100 pounds. He just jerked them out with his hand. He didn't seem to take any precautions for his safety. Later on I looked, and there was some rock there that could have fallen on him, but he wasn't concerned. He brought out what appeared to be a grass nest, possibly some stored hay that small rodents had stored there. He dug through that and brought out the rodents. It seems they ate them. The rodents appeared to be in hibernation or asleep or something. There were about 6 or 8 rodents. The small animal I noticed only got 1, but the others got 2 or 3 apiece. But about that time they became aware of my presence and, well, just became alert. I was alongside of this trail that follows the ridge. I didn't remember getting there, but I was squatting down behind a small tree when I became aware of where I was. As soon as they realized I was there, they suddenly began to move, real quiet behind some low-hanging limbs on a tree there. I didn't see them again after that. I tried to follow their tracks in the direction I thought they would have to go, but I couldn't find any, although there was heavy frost there. But the next day I found 2 tracks, a heel print and the front part of the foot, the toes, but they were in a different direction, the direction from which I had come, and I never did get to connect them up with exactly which direction they had gone, or know anything about them. The footprints, I would say, were about 12 to 15 inches, but there wasn't enough of the track to tell exactly. They were possibly 5 inches wide. I don't know, at the widest point. I don't think they could have been 6. I don't know if it was one of the animals I had seen that made the footprints. So, he goes on for quite a ways there. But it's just an interesting story. It's describing these creatures as animals, as being rather intelligent. Perhaps they stacked these rocks and the mice would hibernate there over the winter or live there over the winter, whatever it may be. And then they would come along and dig them up and eat them. So that is very intelligent behavior. Of course, that story could easily be made up. that story could very easily be made up. And most people would say, yeah, that story is made up. But I just thought it was a very interesting story. He goes on to describe their appearance, their hair, the way they walked, their body types, and that sort of thing. And this whole book is just full of different encounters with Bigfoot, or talking about the footprints. Here is a noted Bigfoot hunter with casts of Bigfoot's footprints. And people have said repeatedly that these prints could not be made by people, even if they're trying to make hoaxes, because they simply sink in too far into the ground, and it's just not realistic. It would take a creature that weighs several hundred pounds to make these footprints. But John Green points out too that there are, especially in the second book from 1971, that more people are starting to hoax these sorts of things, and more people are going out into the woods and finding bear tracks, and misidentifying known animals and that sort of thing. And it was just a really interesting look at the subject of Bigfoot hunting from the late 60s and early 70s, and I really enjoyed it. And I've always loved these books like this. I was really happy when I found this. And yeah, so like I said, the jury is still out on Bigfoot. And I want to thank you for joining me. I really enjoyed reading this book, and I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about it. And I'll see you next time.